2004 as part of the World War II Veterans Project for the Library of Congress. This afternoon we're interviewing Mr. William Pulgram, who's now 83 years old. He's got an interesting history of his life to tell. We're delighted to have him here in the History Center with us today. Bill, thanks so much for being with us.
Pleasure.
What I want you to do, if you would, for the audience that's going to see this in the years to come, and will probably be reviewed by lots of people over the years, is tell us a little about your background, where you were born, where you grew up, what happened to you growing up, and how you got to the United States.
All right, I was born on January 1st, 1921 in Vienna, in Austria, to a middle-class family, and we were comfortable and lived a happy life. I did all the things that a boy does in the early ages, went to school, went to grammar school, gymnasium, and so forth. And it was, we were living comfortably. We were not wealthy, but we were comfortably situated. And that was very badly interrupted, very sadly interrupted by the taking over of Austria by Germany in 1938, when Hitler's troops marched into Germany and disrupted our life very badly. I grew up as the son of a family with mixed backgrounds. Both my father and my mother both had mixed parentage of Jews and non-Jews, and we didn't have we had no religious affiliation, per se, and we never considered ourselves Christians or Jews or whatever. We were just there as part of our normal life, and that was certainly changed after Hitler came over, because you were considered quote Jew, not by religion but by racial background, and all it was necessary was to have one grandmother that was Jewish, and that made you quote Jewish. So all of us became quote Jews, even though, as I say, we didn't feel particularly affiliated with any particular race or any religion. So by the takeover of the Austrian troops, which marched into Germany without resistance, because the Austrians really were not all that much against Nazism at that time, unfortunately, marched in, and it changed our life. One of the first things that happened, of course, that all the stores, I remember very vividly that all of a sudden the grocery stores were all empty of food, because the German soldiers had taken everything out of there and shipped it back to Germany, because the German people themselves didn't have enough to eat. And then there were all these placards put on various stores that were owned by so-called Jews, whether they were Jews of Jewish religion or not, and big signs of it say Jew do not enter, and Jews and dogs not allowed, and all those kinds of things. Well, it was a great big shock to us all. But evidently this was not unexpected by the Austrian people, because the day after Hitler arrived, all the flags came out, and they were all swastika flags. And I don't know where they had been hidden before, because the Nazi Party was actually illegal in Austria before Hitler took over. So was the Communist Party. The only two parties that I recall that were accepted and legal were the Social Democrats and the Christian Socialists, they called themselves. One was a left of center group, not communist. They were communists too, but they were outlawed. And the other was an ultra-conservative group, which was tending over to the right. And a lot of those people from the right, from the Christian Socialists, as they call themselves, were actually illegal members of the Nazi Party, which I didn't know, and not many people knew, because after Hitler took over, all these people came up with their little emblems on their lapel, which indicated that they had been illegal members of the Nazi Party before Hitler took over. And all the armbands came out and all the flags flew, so it was quite obvious that this had been prepared long, long ago, and this was nothing new. And within days after Hitler took over, all the SS and the SA was greatly organized. The SS was the, what do you call storm something or other. The SR had the brown shirts and the SS had the black shirts. The SS was a little higher education level than the brown shirt people. Am I supposed to stop here or shall I?
No, I'm not sure. I turned it on. I turned on this. Francis, did I turn it on? It says, it looks like it's moving some.
No, wait.
All right.
Okay, well, anyhow, so things got kind of rough, and we were beginning. We didn't know exactly what we could expect, but the handwriting was on the wall that we were not welcome anymore. We, quote, Jews, were not welcome anymore. And soon after, it was in March when Hitler came over, and I think it was in late April, and I was going to school. I was attending the gymnasium at that time. I hadn't finished high school yet. I was 17 years old at the time. One day, all of a sudden, my friends in school changed their attitude towards me, because I didn't wear any emblem of a swastika or anything, because I was not eligible to be a Nazi member. Neither did I want to be. And I'm afraid most of them were, because most Austrians, frankly, were very sympathetic towards the Nazis and the Nazi regime. There was a great deal of anti-Semitism, which I wasn't too much aware of before, but which then blossomed and came out. And all of a sudden, some of the boys and girls who I thought were friends of mine turned out to be not friends anymore. And one day in April or beginning of May, I was called to the director's office of the school, to the headmaster or whoever, or whatever you want to call him. And evidently he had called a lot of people, a lot of students from the various grades. There were only three, in my grade I think there were 3 or 4 people who were, quote, Jews, not Aryan. And we were all called into the headmaster's office, and it was about 10:30 or 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. And he said, well, I would like for you people to go home. We can't stay here anymore. And you will be reassigned to another school. And this was a great shock to all of us, because we thought we were there, we were part of the student body. And we said, okay, well, then we won't come back tomorrow. He said, no, I want you to go home right now. And he was really, he didn't seem to be belligerent at all. He seemed to be trying to be helpful. And we said, well, why now? I said, well, I think there may be an unrest after the school. Well, it turned out, I found out later, that there had been a gang of students that had sort of promised to beat us all up after the school was out. So the headmaster told us to please to go on home. We were excused from any further studies. Now, I went around to some of the teachers and said goodbye, and they didn't know what was going on. They didn't even know that I was, quote, not one of those people who had to leave. Anyhow, I went home, and we were assigned to another school where I finished the year, and that was a very unhappy experience for me, because I thought I belonged somewhere, and no longer did I belong somewhere. And the same thing was true for my brother, who was finishing university in Vienna. He had written his dissertation in linguistics, and all the written work was done, but he was not permitted to take the final exam, his verbal exam, to get his doctorate degree. So he was kicked out too. Plus, many of the teachers and professors, of course, were kicked out. A lot of doctors were not allowed to practice anymore. Lawyers were not allowed to practice anymore. And my father was not permitted to continue working. So it was rather a desperate time, and we really didn't know what to do. And we were all talking about, well, we have to leave. Well, but where do we go? My father was 60-something years old, and really was not in a position to start all over again. We couldn't. No one was allowed to take anything out with him. So it was just a matter of task, is to just
Were you scared or just baffled about
I
this?
was scared and baffled both. I was baffled by all that, but of course I finally accepted the fact that this is what's happening. But I was also scared. I remember that looking out my window, over on the left side, in the next block, next to the next building, there was an assembly place for the brown shirts, for the SA troops, and they were a rowdy bunch. They were fairly rowdy people, and you could never. I was afraid to walk out of the house because they could attack me, or for no reason whatsoever. It was just dangerous, frankly, to be out on the street. I recall passing by one time. I mean, before Hitler came, there were some patriotic people in Austria who had written slogans on the street. I've forgotten what they were, but they were in some paint. And what they did is collect a whole bunch of, quote, Jews, put them on the street with brushes to scrub the street. And while these poor older people, and most of them were old people, scrubbing the street, they would throw water with lye in it, sort of up against it, so it would burn their hands and their knees and all that. So these are the things that were going on. People, and I mean, there were reports of people getting beat up, and you couldn't go out at night anymore, and it was just dangerous. It was just dangerous, and you were afraid to open the door as to who might be there. You were afraid when you heard knocking on your door, because you never could tell whether that would be the Gestapo or somebody coming to get you and haul you away for no good reason whatsoever, other than, quote, you were a Jew. I belonged, as you remember, I told you before, I belonged to a Boy Scout troop, and they were, and we continued to meet, and it didn't seem to matter for those boys what you were, whether you were a Nazi or not. And the matter of fact, they were quite sympathetic, because we, a few of us who were Jews, talked about having to leave or leaving, going somewhere else. And I was going to one of those meetings one day, and about 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, the meeting broke up, and a friend of mine and I were walking home. He had a bicycle. I didn't have my bicycle with me. My bicycle had been stolen, as a matter of fact, and there was no recourse. I couldn't go to the police to ask him to look for it, because I didn't have any rights. I had absolutely no rights to get anything done by the police. So my bicycle was gone. He still had his bicycle. And we were walking down the street, and little did I remember, I wasn't aware that we were about to pass the Gestapo headquarters, which was not far from where we lived, between where we lived and between the place where this meeting was going on. And it was within a half a block of the Gestapo headquarters, which used to be a big hotel that they had taken over. 2 men came out and arrested us and took us in. I said, well, this is the end. Of course I was scared. I was 17 years old. I didn't know what to do. He separated us immediately, and I can't even remember who the other boy was, and I don't know what happened to him. I'm ashamed to say that I don't remember what happened to him. Anyhow, I was put up against the wall. I had to stand up straight, facing the wall, right in front of me. Stand at attention, stand. Well, you can't do that too long. You get kind of dizzy, you know. Even though I closed my eyes, still it was kind of tough. So I would move around, and every time I would move, somebody would punch me. So and hit me, but not seriously injure me. I don't know how long I had to stand there. It was dark. It was sort of in the twilight. It was dark, but it kept on, and then it got dark. It was in the summer, so the light, it was quite late. The sun set quite late in the evening, so it was light outside. So when I was walking home, it was still daylight. It was 8:30 or something like that. But inside the building, it was dark. So then I was taken to a room, a dark room, and there was a big light that was shining on me, and sort of an interrogation kind of a thing. And these other guys were sitting around there, three or four were sitting around there, sort of grilling me, saying, well, Oh no, you weren't in the Boy Scout meeting, you were at the communist meeting. I said, no, I wasn't at the communist meeting. But who is this communist leader? And all these kinds of questioning was going on. And every time I couldn't answer their question to their satisfaction, they would guarantee that I would go to the concentration camp. I mean, immediately. So there's nothing I could do because I really had nothing to tell them. There was absolutely nothing that I could tell them other than what I did tell them, and I had resolved that this was probably the last time that I had seen my parents, that I'd seen any of my family, that I would indeed end up in a concentration camp, which many other people had already been arrested and sent off to Dachau, Buchenwald, and some of those kinds of places. And then I think, I'm not sure I remember, prior to that they had taken my identification card, which was from my school, an identification card. And on that identification card was a photograph of me, and the photograph of me was with leather shorts, which I wore in the winter time, that's what people, and these green Loden jackets with a green trim, the Austrian national garb, basically. And one of these people there was looking at this thing, and he said, oh, he asked me, what did I say? He said, oh well, you aren't supposed to wear this because you're not an Austrian, you're a Jew. I said, well, sorry, I didn't know that. And I wasn't wearing that then because it was summertime. And in the summertime, one didn't wear a jacket and these leather shorts, you wear other shorts. So I said, no. I said, well, but where are these clothes? And I said, oh, these leather pants I gave to a friend of mine. I lied. I was flustered. I didn't know what to say. But I told him I'd given to an Aryan friend of mine. And he said, who is that? And I said, it was Fritz Kreiner, a fellow, one of the Boy Scout people, actually, and he lived not very far. So you gave him that away? Yes, I said, yes, I've given that away. He said, and what about the jacket? I said, the jacket I have at home. He said, uh-huh. So I thought they were going to go to my house and get the jacket or something like that after they put me in jail. But I don't remember exactly all the conversation that went on. But in the end, they let me go, and I had to promise, or I was directed to put that jacket in a box, fold it up in some nice paper, and bring it the next day and meet one of these guys on the corner just about a half a block away from the Gestapo headquarters. So evidently that guy wanted my jacket. And that's the reason. It was amazing. These little people, I mean, they were nothings. I mean, they were just getting these kinds of power. And they let me go. And that was about 10:30 or 11 o'clock or something. I'd been there for 3 hours or something. And when I got home, my parents were beside themselves. They didn't know what had happened to me because they had expected me home earlier. And they were certainly glad to see me, and my brother was at home too. And I told them what had happened. And I told them that I had told this lie about these pants, had been giving them to my friend, Fritz Kreiner. I said, oh my goodness, so what are we going to do? You know, everybody was very, 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 very excited about it and worried about it. So the next morning, my brother took those leather pants that I had early in the morning and took them to Fritz Kreiner's house, which was not too far away, about a 50-minute walk. And Fritz Kreiner was not at home. He was out in the country. He had not been at that meeting before, but I just picked the name. And we gave him to his mother. My brother gave these pants to his mother. He said, if anybody asks, tell him that you've had these, that Fritz had these pants. So in the evening, that evening, I had the jacket and had to go to this place and give this man the jacket. And my father was a couple of blocks behind this, sort of watching this, because nothing he could do about it. Because if he had interfered, I mean, they would have arrested him and put him away. So I gave this man this jacket, and he took off, and I went about my way, and nothing happened. The next morning, Fritz Kreiner, the boy I gave this pants to, his mother called us and said the Gestapo had been there to check if indeed I had given those pants to him. This is so ridiculous, such a little thing, how these little people operated, how vicious, but they were vicious people. So that's a narrow escape sort of thing, and from then on I was particularly careful as to where I walked, and when I went out and when I didn't go out. I had strange telephone calls that told me to come downstairs, come downstairs so we could beat you up or something like that. And I didn't even tell my parents about that because they were worried enough. But those are the kinds of things that you just never knew what was going to happen. And then I was, my brother left. He enrolled in the University of Perugia in Italy. So he went by train to Munich and flew from there to Italy. He had an exit permit to go. And then Kristallnacht came along, which was the 10th of November, which is a famous night that one of the, I think a Jewish man had killed one of the Nazi people in Paris the day before, and supposedly as a revenge or something, they were going to just kill a lot of other people, and that prompted Kristallnacht, which is Crystal Night, where they broke all the glass and all the windows and burned all the synagogues and all that stuff, and arrested a lot of people, and they disappeared. When people were arrested, you generally never heard of them again. That's all there was to it, and a good many of that happened to a good many people and a good many of our acquaintances. One of my uncles too, as a matter of fact. But on Kristallnacht, all hell broke loose. There was just all the store windows of Jewish shops were broken, and the hordes of people were roaming the streets, and they were arresting people all over the place and taking them away. And we were at home shaking in our boots. And but I had an intuition somehow to do something unusual. Previously to that, about 6 months before, I had a rash on my legs. It must have been just dry skin, but I'm not sure what. But it was a rash, and it hurt, and it started bleeding. And a doctor gave me some salve and bandage to put on and keep my foot bandaged. But that had gone. That was okay. But that evening, I bandaged my foot. I don't know why, but there was just an intuition. I put this bandage on, and my father saw it and said, "Is your foot bothering?" I said, "No, I just want to bandage it." And I went to bed. And there was much noise during the night. About 7 o'clock in the morning, I was in my bed. I was still in bed. I hear my father knocking on the door, and my father speaking purposely, it seemed very loudly to these people who were out there. And these people were asking for me. And my father, I heard my father say, "But he's sick in bed." And they said, "What's the matter with him?" My father said, "He has a bad foot," because he remembers that I bandaged my foot. He said, "Well, I'm going anyway." So in these people come into my room, and I was still in bed. One was a Gestapo man with black long coat in civilian clothes, and the other man was a German soldier from the German army with steel helmet and a gun and a rifle and all that sort of thing. And the Gestapo man rudely said, "Oh, what are you doing in bed, lazy Jew? You're still in bed, morning." And stuff like that. And I said, "I got a bad foot. This is why I'm bad." "Oh, you don't have a bad foot. Come on, come on. come on, get up and let's go. So I pulled my blanket away and showed them my foot, which I had bandaged. And for some unknown reason, they left and didn't take me. It was just, you know, just one of those things that I didn't expect. I expected to get up and go with them. They didn't take my father because my father was over 60 years old and had served in the Austrian army in World War I and had some medals, which he had little miniatures of. But that was a good thing to do because that saved you a little bit if you were a veteran of the First World War and served in the First World War. So they were a little bit leaner. I don't mean leaner.
More lenient.
More lenient with it. And also when you were older. And so they didn't take my father and they didn't take me, which was just a miracle. Or else I would have been gone probably, I don't know where. I mean, I probably wouldn't have survived. So that certainly showed us that it was something had to be done. But we were not well connected abroad. We were just an average family. We didn't have anybody. One of my uncles was an architect, and he had left, and he had come to this country at that point already. But a friend of mine, his mother was a Quaker, a member of Society of Friends, and she attended Quaker meetings. And the Quakers were active in assisting people to get out. So the Quakers got him a so-called training visa, or a learner's permit, or was it a leerling's permit, an apprentice permit to go to England to learn a trade. Well, I mean, he was a colleague of mine in school, but he was given. They found a family in England for him who would take him in as an apprentice, and this was a baker. The family in England were bakers, so he was going to go over there and become a baker. And he, in turn, when that happened, I also sort of went to the Quakers and applied, well, can I get a permit like that? And he left and went to England, to Manchester, and he wrote me from Manchester, and that he indeed had found another family that would take me. So through the Quakers, I was given a permit to go to England and become a tailor, because they were all trades that we were supposed to. So that's how I left Austria, and I left it legally. I didn't have to sneak across the border or anything like that. So I feel that I was very fortunate that I was able to go. Unfortunately, my parents were not that fortunate. We all had. I had applied to come to America. You had to have. You had to apply to become an immigrant, and you were given a certain number. And of course, thousands of people were applying at that time, and you were given numbers consecutively. And you had to wait until your number came up. In addition to that, you had to have an affidavit by somebody here in this country who would vouch for you, who would say that they would take care of you, of your financial needs, if you came, and that you wouldn't get to be a burden to the country. So I applied, and unfortunately, I did not apply for my parents at the same time. I should have. And my father really was a babe in the woods. I mean, he didn't know what to do, and my mother either, and my sister. So, but I did get an application for them a little later, and submitted it in their name to the American Embassy in Vienna. There were lines outside waiting for people to go in and make these kinds of and sort of submit these applications, which I did. So while I was in England, so I went to England. My parents and my sister were still in Vienna. then the war broke out, the British war broke out in November when Germany attacked Poland. Britain went to war, but not the U.S. And I was in England then, and working in the store for these people and living in their house. After the war broke out after England went to war, then the British, of course, also restricted my movements because I was an enemy alien. I was Austrian. So, and we lived out in the suburbs where I lived. It was in the suburbs, and there was a little police station close by. And one of the detectives there was assigned to sort of watch me. But we became pretty good friends. The detective knew me and I knew him. And I said, okay, so I can go out at night at certain times or something. So I was restricted in my movements in England after the war broke out. But then the war went on, and then Dunkirk came along when the British lost, when Europe was lost to Hitler. And after the evacuation from Dunkirk, after the troops all came back from Dunkirk to England, the British were afraid, of course, of any fifth columnists with already spies coming over. So after Dunkirk, I mean, Hitler could have walked through England because the soldiers came back from Dunkirk, didn't have any guns, and I saw them sort of marching around with, I mean, it's the rifles, they had sticks in their hand, doing close order drill. It was ridiculous. So the English became so worried about these enemy aliens like me living in their country of being betrayed. So one day there was a telephone call, and the people I was living with answered the phone, and I heard him talking. I didn't pay attention. I was ready to go to work with him because the man was driving to work, and I was going to go with him. And after the telephone call, he said, "No, you better stay here because the detective wants to see you." So I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "Well, he said, I don't know, but you can come to the store later." So the detective came and said, "I'm sorry, I got to take you in. I've got to arrest you. You better pack a bag and come with me." So I packed my bag and I went with him, and I went to the police station. From the police station, I went down to headquarters in one of those black Mariah cars. That's the things. And they were all kinds of people assembled there. And the next thing I knew, we said we were being interned. We were putting in prison as enemy aliens. So we were shipped out to an old mill, the old dilapidated cotton mill that hadn't been in production in a long, long time. Windows were all broken out. And we were taken there, and they said, "This is going to be your internment camp." There were barbed wire fences around, and soldiers and dogs and everything around there. So this was going to be a prison camp, and the 20 or 30 of us were the first ones there. But as the day progressed, hundreds of people just arrived, old and young and in between. And when I arrived, they had given me a sort of a mattress filled with straw to put on the floor, so to sleep on. And the next thing they did, they put us to work digging a ditch because there was no plumbing there, so that was going to be our latrines, just to have a ditch there. And all these people came, and some of them were quite old. Some of these people. So I gave one of the old men they were all men. I gave him my mattress, and I just got some straw. And we were at that place. I was at that place for about 3 weeks or so. And then they shipped me out to another camp in Midlands, in the middle of England somehow. And that was a tent camp. It was muddy as all get out. And I remember there was just a plain old wire fence between us and the prisoners of war. They had prisoners of war, German prisoners of war, right next to us, and we were separated from them. And about that time, about a couple of months later, evidently my visa for America came. My brother was here at the time and had arranged for an affidavit for me, and my number was up. So I was able, so fortunate people, it came to the address where I used to live with the people, and they told the authorities that this fellow that you got in an internment camp now is ready to get a visa to go to the United States. So they took me out of that camp, the authorities, and shipped me to a camp near London, which was so I could get to the embassy. And in London, the camp was in Linkfield, and that was a racetrack. And it was an internment camp. There were a lot of other people there for different reasons, not because they wanted to be near London, but there was a racetrack with stands, and we lived in the stables. The stables were quite nice. They were clean, of course. And they were cleaned up, and I lived there. And one day they said, "Okay, we'll take you to the embassy, to the American embassy." So I was taken out of the camp, and two soldiers, one on each side of me. They were wearing their uniforms and guns, and we got on the train, went to England, went to London, about a half-hour ride. We got off of the train in London, Victoria Station or somewhere, I don't know where it was, and marched through London to go to the American embassy. Well, all the British people thought that they had caught a spy, that I was a spy. Well, they were shouting at me and yelling at me and spitting at me and all that kind of stuff, but it didn't matter as far as I was concerned. But I was taken to the consulate, and the soldiers stayed outside while I went in and did my business for an hour and got my passport stamped with the visa and all that stuff. I came out. The soldiers took me back and took me to the train, took me back to camp, and I was not allowed to. I was not gonna. They were gonna let me go until I had passage to go to America on a ship. Well, there were very few ships that were going to America at that time because the war was on. There were only convoys and stuff like that. So I had a ship passage. I was supposed to leave from Glasgow on a certain date. I've forgotten when it was. So 4 days before, they let me out so I could go back to Manchester where I was living and get my things together. I had to report to the police station and all that. And I stayed in London to visit a couple of friends, and the bombs were falling. And I slept down in the underground station down in, I've forgotten which one of the real deep ones. I went down there, slept the night, and came up in the daytime just to get out. The British, that was a horrible time. And the British were very brave because here they were down in these subway stations and various underground shelters and never knew whether their house was being hit, and the next morning they came up and went to work and didn't know whether their house was going to be there or not when they came back up. I didn't have these problems, but by the time I got to Manchester, I had noticed that ship was cancelled. I said, "Oh my God, there I go back to the camp again." I went to the police station. And they said, "Well, what's the story?" I said, "Well, I was told that I would be informed as soon as another ship is available." So I was put under house arrest. So they didn't take me back to camp. Finally, about 3 weeks later, I got a message that I had to report to Liverpool at a certain time to go to a certain hotel and be there, spend the night there, and be ready at 7 o'clock in the morning downstairs in the lobby. Okay, I went to Liverpool. That night I stayed at a little hotel that was designated, and the bombs were falling, I remember that. But we didn't have a shelter there, so I just stayed in the room, and that was it. The next morning I went downstairs. There was a truck out there, a police car, one of those Black Maria things. And I got in, they took me to the dock on the gangplank, and I went aboard a ship. I didn't know what the hell the ship was or anything else about it. But on the ship, I noticed there were signs saying Samaria, so that was the old Samaria. It was a 20,000-ton Cunard liner, a small ship. So, and there were not many people aboard the ship, and I had a third-class passage, which means that I shared a bunk with somebody else. And that evening, we were sitting out there in the harbor, and there were air raids, and that evening, all of a sudden, the engine cranked up. There weren't many people aboard. But but the engine was going. I said, well, we're leaving. So the ship pulled out and went in the middle of the harbor and stopped and dropped anchor. The engine stopped. I said, what was going on? Well, I couldn't find out. I was just on the ship, supposed to go somewhere. And air raids came again. The bombs were falling in the harbor in various places, but our ship didn't get hit. And we stayed there for 2 days. And then a tender came along, several tenders came along with all kinds of young people aboard, with young men. And they all climbed aboard the ship, and then a few hours later, all of a sudden the engines cranked up again, and and the ship was moving, and we looked around, there was no convoy of any kind. So we said, okay, we'll be in the Irish Sea, we'll go up by the Irish Sea, and we'll pick up a convoy up in Scotland, up in that area. Well, the ship went across without convoy, all the way across the North Sea in November. That was 1940. We went to zigzag course, all blacked out. We had to wear life belts all the time. A life jacket had to be with us all the time. It was a very, very rough crossing. I mean, you could stay aft on the ship and see the zigzag course we were taking because the U-boats were out trying to catch all these kinds of things. Sometimes we would hear an airplane, and we would always hope it wasn't the German plane. We had boat drill every day. We didn't know it was for real or not, but it was a boat drill. And one time I remember I was so sick I stayed in the cabin. I didn't go out for boat drill. I said, let's do it. I'll go down with the ship. I was sick enough. I didn't care whether I would go down with the ship or not. Finally, after 10 days, we saw some lights on the horizon. The first lights we had seen, and that was Canada. And we landed in Halifax, and all these young people aboard in civilian clothes that I saw, in civilian clothes, turned out to be British sailors that were picking up some destroyers that were on Lend-Lease from America, that the Americans took to Halifax. And from there, the British picked it up and took it back. They were the four-stacker destroyers, a whole group of them at that time. And so that was the crews that were aboard that ship, the ship that I came. And we stayed there long enough for them to get off a couple hours or so. And then we steamed on down along the coast and got into New York. And that's where I landed in November of 1940 with a suitcase in my hand. Those were my sole possessions. One of the regrets that I have I didn't go through Ellis Island. That was closed at the time because it was during the war. But some custom officials came aboard our ship earlier, somewhere out, I'm not sure where, outside the harbor. And we had to go down below and get our passport checked. And unfortunately, that happened while we were passing the Statue of Liberty. So I wasn't on deck, unfortunately. By the time I got back on deck, the Statue of Liberty was there behind us. So I did not have the great pleasure and the chance of passing the Statue of Liberty as I was looking forward to do, being 18 years, every bit of 18 years old at the time. In New York, my first introduction to this, which is this wonderful country, America, was not the best one. There was a refugee committee that was meeting us. There were about 6 or 8 of us there in the ship, which I didn't know until I got to New York. I found out who these other people were. And there was a man from the refugee committee there who was sort of collecting us and taking us to a shelter. I don't remember where the shelter was. It was a shelter set up for these young people who came in. And he said, you got your suitcase? Yeah, I got my suitcase, and everybody else had their suitcase. And he said, well, we've got to take a taxi. And do you have any money? He asked these people, and I don't know what the others said, but I was being honest. I said, yes, I have $20. He said, okay, I need $2 to pay for the taxi. He was just cheating, because he was given that money. But anyhow, I was in New York, and I was pleased to be pleased in this country. So this is sort of very briefly as to as to what happened. The grimness of the situation in Austria was fierce and disappointing and frightening. Unfortunately, my parents and my sister never got out of there.
Did you ever find out what happened to them, Bill?
Yes, in 1940, they were in Vienna, and my brother and I had arranged for an affidavit for them, and they were ready to go, but their number hadn't come up. That was before America entered the war. So there was still communication, and finally their number was up. They were ready to leave, and they had crates, wooden crates that people used to have. You couldn't take any valuables, but you could take your belongings, supposedly. And the crates were sitting packed in their apartment, and they were ready to leave 2 days. Within 2 days, they had passage. We had paid for the passage here. We had borrowed money to pay for their passage. When the concierge of the building that we lived in turned them in, and they were arrested, and they were sent to Theresienstadt, which was sort of a model prison, supposedly, that the Germans put up. So when the Red Cross came, they could see how well they lived. And my sister died there of pneumonia. She was 18. She was not. Well, that was in 1942, I guess, or 1941. Must have been 41 or 42. She was 19 at the time. And my parents stayed there, and I have records and from there, as people were brought into this place, other people were shipped out to the chambers, the gas chambers in Auschwitz. And I have gotten from the authorities in Vienna a record of all these shipments and of all the people that were shipped out. And my parents were in the last shipment that left that camp to Auschwitz, and were murdered.
Did your brother who went to Italy get over here?
Yes, my brother from Italy went to Switzerland first, because his numbers were not up yet either for a visa, and he had a visa and stayed in Switzerland, and he was fortunate to be protected in Switzerland. Because the Swiss shipped their people back to Germany. When they came illegally. But he was protected by some people in Switzerland, by some Swiss people, and finally came to this country before I did.
Where did you go to college?
Georgia Tech.
You went to Georgia. You were in the military in the United States
Yes, I was.
Armed Forces.
1943 to 46, and that was a strange experience too, but I did talk about that before in this other thing. I was drafted into the military, and I was eager to go. And I had left. I was here in Atlanta, drafted to go to Fort McPherson and to be inducted into the service. And I did, and I passed. I went through these hordes of people through the medical exam and all that. And then there were about 30 or 40 of us standing in line while the young lieutenants over there checked through these papers before swearing us in to become soldiers. And he was looking through this paper, and all of a sudden he said, "Pulgram." I said, "Yes." He said, "Come over here." So I went up to see him. He said, "Oh, you're an enemy alien." I said, "My God, there I go again." And he said, "We can't take you in the army. You're an enemy alien." So the others got sworn in. I didn't get sworn in. I went back home, and I was really unhappy, because I was eager to serve in the army, to do something about this horror that was going on. So I made all kinds of contacts, and I found out that, okay, if I wrote a letter that would show that I volunteered to be drafted, then I could go in. But previously my brother had gone in without any trouble, and he had been sent to the Fiji Islands and had already been back on a medical discharge before I before they ever drafted me. Anyhow, I went ahead and wrote these letters and stuff, and finally they called me again in June of 1943 to be inducted into the Army, and this time it took. It took. So
You have had a very distinguished career in Atlanta as an architect, I believe.
well, yes, I was very fortunate. After the war, after the Army, I was able to study under the GI Bill, and I went to Georgia Tech, and then to Fontainebleau, to the École des Beaux-Arts, and studied architecture, and graduated. And this country has been a marvelous. And my life here has been just a sort of total opposite of what I experienced before I got here. The last few years that before I got here, it's just been a magnificent part of my life.
I know you have one son who plays violin at the Atlanta Symphony, and
That's correct.
Chris.
Christopher, yeah, he's a violinist with the first violin section of the Atlanta Symphony. I have another son who is an attorney in San Francisco, and I have another son who's an opera singer in New York City, and I have a daughter who is a psychologist up in Massachusetts. So that is my family. I married an Atlanta woman who is an artist, who is a painter, who was born here in Atlanta, and we have a very, very wonderful family.
What lessons would you like to say in the next couple of minutes? We've got about 5 or 6 minutes left.
Goodness, it's been
Before
that
the
long.
tape runs out.
I didn't realize.
What lessons would you like to impart to future generations that are going to be watching this? Because your story is one of heroism, one of sadness, and one of triumph.
Well, I just want to tell people what a marvelous. I mean that this country was for me and is for many other people truly a land of opportunities. That it is freedom and hard work and consistency will get its awards. And I have experienced that. I mean, nowhere else could this happen, I think. That here I came to this country with $20 in my pocket, and through no inheritance or other means, I'm now comfortably situated, and comfortably situated in retirement. And that speaks to the possibilities that this country presents to people. I think it's just marvelous that I was able to do this, and when I go back and my children always think of me as being a hero. Well, I'm not a hero. I didn't do anything much to be a hero during the war, but it's this country that provided me the opportunity to live a full life with some sadness of the loss of my family. But I admire what people can do here greatly, and then truly true patriots.
Do you harbor any feelings of hatred toward the people who did this to you initially, or have you?
Of course I do. Of course I do. When I first went back in the 50s, I had a hard time facing the people who were at the age where I could see that they were probably at the age where they were probably part of the regime that did all this to us. When I go back now, I don't see that anymore. That I mean, I don't blame the present generation for what their grandfathers did. I've just returned from Austria, as a matter of fact. I was over there just a month ago, and the Austrians, I can't hold that against the Germans and Austrians. I was in Germany and in Austria just a few weeks ago, and I can't blame these young people. They are burdened with a tremendous amount of guilt, which is justified, fully justified. And I don't envy them for that, but I can't take it off of them either, because I know there is reason for it.
Sure.
And that's how I feel about it.
Well, this has been a wonderful experience, and
Well,
from
thank
my
you very
generation
much.
to yours, we thank you so very much.
Well, thank you, David.
It's an honor and privilege to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
I figured out how to turn this off.
Who knows?